Hi, welcome to Family History Today, the Center for Jewish History's monthly series of genealogy-themed public programs. My name is Moriah Amit, and I am the Center's Senior Genealogy Librarian. The Center for Jewish History provides a collaborative home for 5 partner organizations that together form the largest archive on the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. In addition, the center houses the Ashkenazi and Family Genealogy Institute, which is where I am based. And at the Institute, we strive to connect researchers to a wealth of genealogy resources at the center and to make family history accessible to researchers of all ages, abilities, and levels of experience, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. We encourage you to visit our Genealogy Institute Monday through Thursday, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., no appointment needed. At the Institute, you will enjoy free access to genealogy databases and reference books with our librarians and experienced volunteers on hand to provide guidance. If you're unable to visit in person, you may email us at gi@cjh.org to ask for advice or to schedule a free 45-minute Zoom consultation. To learn about our upcoming programs, sign up for our weekly e-newsletter at cjh.org or check out our full program calendar at programs.cjh.org. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and I want to give a special shout out to everyone who sent questions in to me. There were so many fascinating ones that took me in so many different directions. It's hard to select just a few. That being said, I have chosen just a few examples for tonight, and I hope these examples will effectively illustrate what makes the Center for Jewish History an important and unique destination for those interested in exploring their family history and the Jewish communities where their families live. If you did submit a question that I did not select for tonight's program, don't worry, your question will be answered by a member of our team within the next 2 weeks by email. Okay, so in terms of live questions, I do prefer that you mostly stick to questions regarding the examples that I will be discussing tonight, or just if you have any questions about visiting the center, searching our catalog, or anything like that, that's welcome as well. Again, if you have more detailed family history questions, please send those in to gi@cjh.org. That being said, feel free to send us your questions and comments anytime during this program by using the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. And please note, however, that I will only answer your questions during the dedicated Q&A period at the end of the program. If you'd like to view the captions for this program, simply click on the closed caption or CC button, and then click show subtitles. And that CC button is on the bottom of your screen. And lastly, this program will be recorded. So in 2 to 3 weeks, you will receive an email with the link to view the recording. All right, so no need to introduce anyone else. I've already introduced myself. So I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. By the way, I've chosen to keep the submitters anonymous. But if you would like to write in and identify yourself, feel free to do so. Okay, so 1 second. All right, so as advertised, 1 more second. Okay. As advertised, tonight is called Ask a Genealogy Librarian. And of course, I am that librarian for tonight anyway. And I asked you to submit questions to me about the unique sources that we have available for genealogists at the Center for Jewish History. A bit about the center. before I go into the specific examples that I'm going to answer tonight. First of all, for those of you who are new to the Center for Jewish History, we are one building, but we house a lot of different things within that one building. We have several different museum galleries that rotate every few months. We have a whole host of programs here as well as on Zoom. And these programs range from films to author talks to conferences. We have an upcoming comic book convention in November. So please, if you're interested in that, check out our program calendar. This is being described as the Jewish Comic-Con, so that's an exciting thing. And we've also had a host of different kind of lectures, galas, and so forth. Of course, there's also the library reading room, which is where people come to do research on all sorts of topics within Jewish history and Jewish culture from communities all over the world. There's the Genealogy Center, which is where I am based. And last but not least, we house the collections of 5 different partner organizations. They include the American Jewish Historical Society, the American Sephardi Federation, the Leo Beck Institute, which focuses on German-speaking Jewry, YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, which focuses on Eastern European Jewish people and the Holocaust. And finally, the Shiva University Museum. So in our one reading room, you can access all of the different partner collections. So all 5 that I listed below, I did in my previous slide. It doesn't matter where you are requesting materials from, they will all be brought down for you to view in this common reading room, which is on the 3rd floor. And again, the hours are Monday through Thursday, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. For the reading room, in contrast to the Genealogy Institute, appointments are highly recommended, although they are no longer required. So I talked about partner collections. They span a range of years from the 1500s to the modern times. As I mentioned, they come from places all over the world, including near and far. We certainly have a lot of New York City oriented materials, but we also have things from Shanghai, and we have materials from Ethiopia, for example. And we have something like 5 miles of documents, historical and modern, and over 500,000 books, as well as other kinds of materials like music, film, photographs, art and artifacts, and the list goes on. So within all of that archival and library material, I would like to, of course, now hone in specifically on genealogy sources that are held within those collections. And the kinds of genealogy sources that you can find here include things like family papers, Jewish community records and histories, Jewish organization records, and the organizations can range from communal organizations, political organizations, cultural organizations, religious organizations, you name it.
Moriah, could I interrupt you for just a second? A number of people have said that they are having trouble hearing the audio. So I wonder if taking your headphones out and speaking to the computer might be clearer for people? Or
there's no
I see. Okay.
there's no microphone in the computer. Let me see if there's anything else I can do. 1 second. Let's see.
Is this any better? No. Can you hear it? Can you hear me now? Sounds better? Okay, I'll try to speak up. All right, going back to my slideshow. Diaries, autobiographies, and oral histories, newspapers, and photographs. Those are just, that's not even an exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea of the kinds of things you can expect to see here. Of course, we also have some uniquely Jewish sources in our archives, things like Moilbucher, or some circumcision registers, ketubot, which are marriage contracts, yizkor, or memorial books, which I'll be talking about in much more detail in a bit, landsmanshaftn, or hometown society records. Just quickly about landsmanshaftn, they were established by recent immigrants to America, as well as other parts of the world, where many Jews settled in the modern era. And they were established by groups of people from the same town, hence landsman, meaning your fellow hometown compatriots, I guess. It's the closest thing I could think of in English. And okay, and then moving, I should say a quick thing about our records. We have the records of over 1,400 different societies that were founded in New York. And many of you are familiar with the idea of burial societies. If you've ever visited a Jewish cemetery, you'll often see the gates marking different sections of the cemetery with the names of the sponsoring society. However, these societies had other functions as well. They provided mutual aid to each other. They were places for people to socialize, and so on. Moving on, synagogue records, of course. I will say that we are not the repository of all synagogue records that have survived from the many historical synagogues that existed, even if you're talking about just within New York City. We have sort of a smattering of those. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email us. And then finally, of course, rabbinical genealogies, which can be quite detailed and go, back for centuries. And actually, Typically, they follow a different pattern than your normal family tree in that they start with a common ancestor and then branch forward in time to show that original ancestors' descendants. Okay. So how can you find out if we have something relevant to your family history? You could search our online catalog. You don't need to be here to do that. You can do that on your home computer at search.cjh.org. And you can enter things like the name of the town or towns where your family came from, or regions. And you can also search for names of organizations that your family members may have been involved with, or organizations like different kinds of charities that may have aided your family, whether it's aided them in immigrating to the US, or helping them get settled in America, find jobs, get vocational training, and so forth. And that being said, I do not recommend that you just type in family names in this catalog, because most of our collections have not been indexed by name. You're not likely to find any results. The exceptions are, of course, if you have a rabbi in your family, or a famous person in your family, or you happen to know that your family, a member of your family donated papers to us. Otherwise, our catalog is like any other library catalog out there, and it doesn't work the way many people who are doing family history research would like. It's not ancestry.com. So yes, you can find lots of information about individuals and families in our collections, but you have to be a little bit more creative about finding those things. Okay. We've also created a series of genealogy research guides, and one set of those, or subset of those, is our research guides about resources at the Center for Jewish History. And those provide sort of large overviews of the major kinds of material, and even specific collections or books, etc., that pertain to these sort of broader categories of materials. So, for example, we have I'm going to talk a little bit more later about our New York City orphanage records. We have the records of 5 major Jewish orphanages in New York City. And we also have from the American Jewish Historical Society, as you can see here, military records. So not only just brief cards about a veteran's service, either in World War I or in World War II, but actually either entire questionnaires or an entire file of information on Jewish servicemen, and of course that's defined differently in these two different collections. But in either case, it provides a wealth of information on Jewish servicemen in a period in which, unfortunately, the records of or the service files of people in the military during World War I and World War II were heavily damaged in a large fire at the National Archives Military Records Center in St. Louis. So these are can be really important for those looking for information on their World War I and World War II veterans, because in some cases they may be the only records of their military service that still exist. That's just a few examples, and I'm going to get right on to the questions that came in. Oh, one more quick thing. If you can't come in person, you can request scans or digital copies of collection materials. It's best to start by emailing inquiries@cjh.org. That's the email address of our reading room, and they will send you instructions on how to request scans or digital copies. This is just below that. It's just a little bit about our pricing, and just note that you'll receive a cost estimate before any scans or digital images are taken. You'll need to approve that estimate before your request will be processed. Just a quick note about books. If you are interested in copies of or of a section of a book was published after 1924, that means it's likely still under copyright law, and therefore we can only scan up to a third of the book. Turnaround time ranges greatly depending on, well, first of all, our staff availability, but also, you know, the length, the number of pages you are interested in having scanned, and you know, the fragility of the materials and factors like that. So it can be, you know, something that you can get in just a couple of days if you're asking for a scan of one page, for example. But if you're putting in a really large order, it can take sometimes up to 2 months. Okay. So starting with question 1, this researcher submitted the following question. My father's family was from Sanok, Poland. When his parents came to America in the early 1920s, most of their family members stayed in Sanok and were murdered in Belzec, which was a death camp. How can I learn what life was like for them in Sanok before World War II? And also, how can I learn about the events that led up to their deportation to Belzec? So that's a great question. We do have a significant amount of books, archival documents, photos, etc., having to do with the Holocaust period. That being said, I do want to note that we are not one of the major Holocaust repositories in the world. Those are the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, which is Israel's Holocaust Museum, and the Arlsen Archives, located in Bad Arlsen, Germany, which was formerly known as the International Tracing Service. That being said, you can potentially find information on your family's experience during the Holocaust within our collections, and sometimes even information about individuals and individual families. But we don't have the kind of genealogy database that you would find on the website of, Yad Vashem, for example. Okay, so starting with memoirs and testimonies. This one, of course, comes from someone who grew up in Sanok, Poland. And just I would like to read a brief excerpt to sort of get a feeling for what these memoirs can offer you in terms of, building a greater picture of what your family's life was like, what their childhoods were like, and again, how they fared in different major historical events. So Shlomo Noble said, "I spent my childhood in the town of Sanok on the river San in eastern Galicia. The peasants living on the east bank of the river were Ukrainians, while those on the west bank were Poles. The town was built on the mountainside, and there was a railroad station in the valley. The population of the town was equally divided among Poles, Ukrainians, and Jews. Jews from many places had come to live there on account of the railroad car factory located in Sanok. All of them were Hasidim. There were 20 different Hasidic prayer houses, including those of the Belzer, Sadigerer, and Sanzer Hasidim. And all of these groups had their own dialects of Yiddish." So that's sort of an interesting slice of life account of, important factors that would affect anyone's experiences in terms of the ethnic groups that made up this city, what the major industry there, and also this information about the kinds of Judaic sects that were active here, for example. We also have a number of Jewish heritage travel guides. So these will provide you with information about what the places where your family came from look like now, and sort of an itinerary of what is still standing that you can see from the former Jewish communities there. So for example, here in Sanok, we learned that only 2 of their 6 pre-war synagogues still exist. There's the small Sadiger synagogue, which is the one pictured in the middle here, which was built during the interwar period. Of course, it was a Hasidic synagogue, and we even learned the street address. Of course, it's while it's no longer used as a synagogue, it is the seat of the state archive, so I imagine it's still possible to go inside and look around. Let's see. Other traces of the Jewish presence in Sanok are tenement houses of the Raymer, Weiner, and Eichel families built in the main streets of the town. And as you can see on the right, this is a picture of what was known as the New Jewish Cemetery, which was built also during the interwar period. And as you can see, there's the cemetery is not in great condition today. And of course, many of the stones are also missing because they were later used as building materials, unfortunately. But it's still a place that you can, visit and honor your relatives. And then finally, I just wanted to point out that this book is called The Hasidic Route, and Sanok is just one stop along that route. That, of course, goes to a number of different Polish cities and towns that were instrumental in Hasidic history. Okay. Finally, I want to talk about Giskor or memorial books. These were published in large numbers by survivors after the war, for the most part in the first few decades after the war, although some continued to be published in the 80s and 90s. These books were created by survivors in order to commemorate, of course, the family members and friends who they lost in the Holocaust, as well as their Jewish communities that were wiped out. So they include all sorts of wonderful information, as well as photos, copies of interesting documents from the Jewish community, and lists of names and more. And I just want to mention, even though they are, dedicated to the memory of Holocaust victims, they go into detail about actually the entire history of the Jewish community in that place, from its earliest settlement up to World War II. So you can learn about, that sort of the timeline of Jewish history there. It will also give you information about prominent members of the Jewish community, and all sorts of interesting nuggets, again, about sort of daily life and culture, the different types of organizations that flourished, schools, synagogues, etc., that were all part of, would have been a part of your ancestors' lives. And these are just 2 examples of photos that you can find in the Sanach memorial book. Oh, I forgot to mention, of course, that most of these were originally written in Hebrew and Yiddish. And we have here at the center over 750 of the something like 1,000 Yizkor books that have been published. Many of them have been more recently made available online through the New York Public Library and Yiddish Book Center. That being said, there are still a number that are not online, and so if that is the case for your hometown, then this is the kind of thing that you may want to come into the center to view. Because I should also mention that these are out of print, and were only printed in limited quantities, so there are not that many. There are not many of these books that are sort of out there. I also want to point out that the website jewishgen.org has done a remarkable job of translating many of these books into English. That project is still ongoing now, and you can find out more about how to support or participate in the project on jewishgen.org. More specifically, you can go to this website on the screen. And thankfully, the Yizkor book for Sanach has been at least partially translated. And so I just want to read an excerpt about the events leading up to the deportation of many of the Jewish inhabitants to Belzec, as happened to the members of the Inquirer's family. Okay, so the decree of deportation was issued about a week before Rosh Hashanah, 1941. Approximately 10,000 Jews of Sanach were transferred to the Zaslav camp in one day. Sorry, that was supposed to be Zaslav. In Zaslav, they were loaded upon cramped transport wagons and sent to the Belzec death camp. Some people attempted to hide from the deportation, but they were unsuccessful. There are more details about this gut-wrenching episode in the Rescore book, but I decided to spare you some of that information. And I, of course, would be remiss if I didn't mention that most of the Rescore books end with a list of Holocaust victims from that town, as remembered by the survivors who came together to write this book. So of course the original list of names will be in either Hebrew or Yiddish, but as part of the Rescore translation project on Jewish Gen, many of them have also been translated into English. Okay, I think, oh yes, one more slide about this particular question. I also wanted to mention that YIVO, which is our partner library and archive that specializes in the history of Eastern European Jewry, they've created this massive online catalog of photographs of Jewish life in pre-war Eastern Europe, which you can find at yivo1000towns.cjh.org. These photographs picture thousands of Jewish communities in Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine, and so on throughout Eastern Europe. They span from the late 1800s up to the early 1940s, and were taken in cities, large and small towns, and villages. So essentially places of all sizes. And in some cases, YIVO's photographs are the only known photos of communities that were later wiped out by the Nazis. While, as you can see on the left here, I did a search for Sanok and found and came up with 22 different photos taken there of different people, of specific events, of specific locations within the town. As you can see, many of them come from the interwar period, which is when the period in which the Inquirer's immediate family had moved to the US, but they were still in contact with their family in Sanok during this period. Okay. So finally, oh wait, I just want to mention that this catalog itself, even as large as it is, covers only a small fraction of YIVO's extensive historical photo collections. So there are many photos which you cannot view online, but you can come here and view them in person, or you can request a digital image of these photos, again through our reading room. Okay, moving on to question 2. I will speed this up because I know we're getting close to the end of our time. But question 2 is the following. My great-grandfather, Morris Holtziger, worked as a cap maker and quickly moved up in the ranks of the American Cap Makers Union and the American Federation of Labor in the first decade of the 1900s. My grandmother, who was Morris's daughter-in-law, even told me that Samuel Gompers attended Morris's funeral on December 31st, 1911. How can I find more information about his roles in these organizations and more generally his union activities? Another great question, because we happen to have a large amount of material on the history of Jewish labor, the Jewish participation in the American labor movement, as well as in as individual Jewish unions. What he described was what the Inquirer described as the cap workers or cap makers union. Well, it went through multiple different phases in which at points, or I should say over time, it sort of merged with other various unions to the point where it by 1925 it had become the Cloth, Hat, Cap, and Millinery Workers International Union. That being said, there were, of course, national and local branches of this union as well. And this book here, which is a history of that union, the first 25 years anyway, which includes the first decade. Those are the years that Morris would have been involved in the union. So this book is in Yiddish, but I just want to point out here, I took a snapshot of one page where it mentions the delegates that were sent to the second and third Congress, the convention of the American Federation of Labor, and this was they were elected as delegates from 1902 through 1904. And on that list is, if you can read Yiddish, it says M. Holtzinger. So that is, in fact, the Inquirer's great-grandfather. Okay. In other books in our collections, I found a number of interesting photos of this union, including some of the members at work in one of the cap-making factories, and also even a photo of the delegates to one of those national conventions. This is from the 5th convention, unfortunately, not the 2nd or 3rd, but it still gives you an idea of what that would have looked like. We also have other books about the history of this union, including this one called Spotlight on a Union. And while I did not find any information specifically about Morris, I did find some very interesting members recalling their experiences in the union. And I'm highlighting this specific one because I think it really speaks to the risks that people took, including Morris, in being a part of this union, and the dangers that you may not think about as much in being a member of a union today. So from this particular person's recollections, he's actually talking about another person. He's describing a man who got a job in the Union Hat Company. That was his first job as a cap maker or hat maker. And when he tried to get help the company unionize, the other workers would not listen to him and would say things like, "You're a green kid, you don't understand the dangers. Who can afford to risk a job today by joining a union?" Unfortunately, the risks were quickly brought home to him. In his second job, this was in his first job, inside of 2 weeks, he was called in by his boss and fired on the spot. At his next employer, he was also fired within 2 weeks. And then finally, in his third employer actually threw him down 3 flights of stairs. So yeah, it was certainly no joke to be involved in this sort of activity in the early 1900s. That being said, people like the man described in the previous excerpt, as well as Morris, continued their activities despite those dangers. And I found this Capmaker's Bulletin from August 1911, which is when Morris would have been probably at the height of his standing in the Union only a few months before he died. And this bulletin describes what the Union basically accomplished in the previous 2 years. So they say we had 72 strikes. 34 of these were for the recognition of the Union and the Union conditions. Of these, 19 were won. 30 strikes were for prices, of which 24 were won and 6 were lost. 7 strikes were for better treatment or sanitary conditions, and those were won. And of the different, branches of the Union, New York led with 53 strikes, quite a number of them being due to the organizing of 35 small shops. Perhaps Morris was one of those organizing within a small shop. Okay, so that's the end of this particular question. However, Morris Holtzinger left an important legacy that also unfortunately included, the tragedy of his death and the impact that had on his family. So again, he died at the end of 1911, leaving his wife Fanny alone with 5 sons. The Inquirer's grandfather, who was one of Morris's sons, the second oldest, had to leave school to go to work because he was, must have been in his teen years by then. She brought the next 2 boys, Emmanuel, age 10, and Edward, age 7, to live in the Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum in 1912. Because Emmanuel kept running away, Fanny was forced to put her youngest son, Leo, who was then aged 5, into the orphanage. And so the Inquirer wants to know, how can I find more information about their time in the orphanage? So this person is actually in luck because while I said in general our records are not available on Ancestry, there are a few exceptions. The American Jewish Historical Society, one of our in-house partners, made a number of their genealogically relevant collections available to Ancestry, and Ancestry both digitized those records and made them searchable. So you can you can go to ancestry.com, whether you're using it for free in a library such as ours, or you have a subscription at home. And instead of going to the usual search, instead of starting to type in a name on the first page, you're going to want to actually navigate to a different part of the website called the card catalog, which you can usually find on the top right hand corner of the screen. When you get to the card catalog, you can type in the keywords box the name of the organization in question here. So I typed in Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum, and right away I was able to pull up another box like this that looks the same as the one on the Ancestry.com homepage, but this particular one will only search the records of the Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum. And just for more information about the different collections that the American Jewish Historical Society has provided to Ancestry.com, which you can search by name, go to our research guides website, libguides.cjh.org, and then within the genealogy guides section, you'll find our resources at the Center for Jewish History page. And then within that, you can go into the American Jewish Historical Society section. Okay, so what did I find when I put in Morris's uncles' names? I found them a few times in different registers or ledgers of what were known as admission, ledgers of admission and ledgers of discharge. These are literally books, many of them unfortunately crumbling now, but they are books in which these entries were handwritten in chronological order. So as new children were admitted, they would start a new line, and there were, since a number of different, I should say, a number of decades of these records survive, there are, of course, many books like that in the American Jewish Historical Society's records. So what do we see here? We see in the first section on top, near the top, a record showing Emmanuel, the oldest, and the oldest of the of those that were put into the orphanage, and Edward, the second oldest, being admitted in actually, sorry. It does have information about their admittance, although it's hard to see here because there's a ditto mark for their date of admission, but I can tell, you'll see later on more information. And then the date of expiration, some people find amusing, but it actually meant essentially the date in which that child would age out of the orphanage and have to be released either to well, basically we're old enough to legally live independently, and of course there's their dates of birth. This column where you see half on both lines, that's referring to the fact that they were half orphans. That's what they what children who had lost one parent were called. And we also have information about their discharge on the same exact line. So they was later added to. And as you can see, Emmanuel was discharged almost right away in 1912 to his mother, whereas Edward lived another 7 years, or lived a total of 7 years in the orphanage, and only was released in 1919. A little bit further down, here's Leo, the youngest, and he let's see, he was born in Brooklyn as opposed to his brothers who were born in Manhattan. Again, a half orphan, and he also unfortunately stayed in the orphanage for 7 years as a result of him having to switch places with his brother Emmanuel. Further down, we have sort of a duplication of that information. except this is actually from the date. This one is only from the time of their admission. So we again have Edward and Emmanuel, and then Leo further down. You can see that they were that the first two boys were admitted in April of 1912, and the youngest boy wasn't admitted till January of the next year. We see also information about their parents, which is interesting. First of all, we of course know that Morris, their father, is the one who died, but in some cases, families are still trying to figure out what happened to the parents of their family members who were orphaned or placed in orphanages. We also have the name of his mother, or their mother, Fanny, with her maiden name, Greenberg. And the place where they come from, father and mother, and where it says occupations, I think that's actually their birth dates, meaning the children's birth dates. Okay, and then finally, towards the bottom, we have, let's see, the bottom line, or the second to the bottom line, we have Leo and then Edward Holzinger, showing that they were, let's see, I think showing that they were discharged in June to their mother, Fanny. By the way, we can also track the different addresses at which Fanny lived over time. Yeah, so I just want to say that the records of the Hebrew Orphan Asylum on Ancestry are really the only records of that specifically talk about individual children within the Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum collection. So while they probably kept lots of other kinds of records on the children, unfortunately, those records have not survived to today, only these admission and discharge ledgers. However, that's not the only place to learn about the experiences of the Holzinger children. The Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum collection also has a great series of clippings about the asylum, both from the perspective of the administration and the workings of the donors, etc., but also has a number of articles on the children themselves and what their day-to-day lives were like. So surprise, surprise, they were required to work from a pretty early age, or at least to begin training to do various kinds of manual work. So I just want to read a quick section here. Let's see. Starting from the little babies to the young men and women, everyone has some manual work that keeps him or her busily occupied. And also says, and pleasantly spending the time. I mean, I guess that's could be one person's interpretation. While the girls enjoyed their sewing, cooking, and gymnasium, the boys, such as the three Holzinger boys, they would work in the shop, do basketry work, electricity, and also gymnasium. And this is obviously a photo of some of the boys in the workshop. That being said, there were also leisure activities. offered to these orphans or half orphans. And of course, it's always good press to talk about, you know, orphan children having a good time, you know, out of the asylum, and doing the kinds of, you know, activities that other children would have experienced. So here it talks about, in this article, it talks about outings, that they have outings almost every week to Coney Island, to Prospect Park, to Rockaway, or some other popular resort. The expenses for the outing came from the special fund of the Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum. Mrs. Rose Abraham will be the fairy godmother at their next trip to the park. And later in the season, they will be introduced to the wild waves that wash the shores of Rockaway Beach when Mrs. Rose Abraham, again, shows her interest in the children. So I'm guessing that Mrs. Rose Abraham was one of the benefactors of the orphan asylum, but she also went a step further and chaperoned a number of their field trips. And this photo here comes from one of those field trips, with the unfortunate title, Orphan Kitties, Guests of Brooklyn Lodge of Elks at Ebbets Field. This is in 1914, when at least two of the Holsinger boys were still in the asylum. And it says also at the bottom of the picture, some of the 2,000 happy children from Brooklyn asylums who were at their annual outing, sponsored by the Elks, I think it says, at Ebbets Field yesterday. So here you can see a whole section of children in these, it's hard to tell what, excuse me, what part of the you know, seating they were in, but I'm guessing is not mixing amongst the more illustrious crowds. Okay, and finally, we also have a number of books on life in New York City Jewish orphanages. These are a couple of examples. A Girl from the Home, which talks about one girl's experience growing up in the Brooklyn Hebrew Orphan Asylum, and also this book about the history of the New York Hebrew Orphan Asylum, which means the Manhattan Asylum. Okay, so with that, I will answer a few questions here. Okay, so Ravel Scherer says, whoever is asking about Sanok, my family came from there too. Please contact me with her email address. So I hope that individual is here tonight. Otherwise, I'm going to take down your email so I can pass it on to him. Oops. Okay. Okay. Oh, Annette asked a great question. At what age did children age out? So actually, if we go back a couple of slides, we can figure this out. So Edward, who was born in 1904 and would have been admitted in 1912 when he was about 8. He would have aged out in 1920. So it would have been 16. Yeah, and the same for Emmanuel. So yeah, I would say, and from also what I've seen from others, I think 16 is the typical time to age out of the system. Are there any good online translation sites to translate Yiddish to English? That's a great question. There, well, there's a few possibilities. So if you are looking for probably the easiest way to go about getting translations of if you just have like one or two pages is to post them on one of the Facebook groups devoted to Jewish genealogy. The largest one is called Tracing the Tribe, so I would recommend starting there. And you will be surprised by how many people will send you their interpretations, and it's kind of be, I think it will be cool for you to see how different people translate whatever it is you're looking whatever document you have provided. If you don't use Facebook, there is also on jewishgen.org, there's a section called ViewMate where you can post an image for people to, again, to respond with their translation. It's then a good idea to also write into the Jewish Gen discussion forum, which is an email forum with your sort of announcement about having posted those images to the ViewMate page. And then for those of you who are really interested in new handwriting recognition software, there is a website called transcribus.ai, where you can actually upload a photo of a document, a handwritten document in a number of different European languages, one of which is Yiddish, and it will give you a print, a print transliteration of the handwriting, and then what you can do from there is copy and paste that transliteration into Google Translate. So it's kind of a two-step process, but it can be done. It's not perfect. You will see a number of errors, and sometimes it might be a little bit tough to get the meaning of things, but I think in general you can at least get the basic drift of the document, and then when you want a more detailed translation, you can post to one of the groups that I mentioned. Thank you, Leslie, for pointing out for the non-New Yorkers that Eppets Field is where the Brooklyn Dodgers used to play. Oh, Stephanie, I will share that email address with you shortly. Thank you. Stephanie was the inquirer about Sanak. Let's see. Marilyn says she has 20 pages. Okay, so if you have 20 pages, then I would just spread them out. You don't want to take too much advantage of people's goodwill. So I would say maybe, try to put out one page a week or something like that. Or you could spread them out amongst the different Facebook groups as well. Let's see. Okay, Stephanie asks, how might we access New York City census information for the period 1890 to 1945? Great question. That's something that is something that you can find online through ancestry.com, which again you can use here for free, but of course it's not exclusive to the Center for Jewish History. The ancestry.com has searchable census records from the US throughout that period that you mentioned, well, actually from 1890 to 1950, as well as, I should say, censuses from before 1890. And there were also a number of state censuses that were taken in New York State from in 1905, 1915, and 1925. So that can sort of supplement your in the information about your families, where they lived and what their household was like during the, in between the every 10 years of the US Census. But those are specifically 1905, 1915, and 1925, all of which are also searchable on Ancestry. Will transcribus.ai work for tombstones? That's a great question. I have not tried, so I can't speak to that, but I would certainly think it would be interesting to give it a shot. That being said, tombstones are relatively simple to translate, especially if you're only looking for information about the person's name and their father's name. So that's something that you can either send to one of those Facebook groups, or you could even send it into the Genealogy Institute at gi@cjh.org, and one of us can quickly provide the name information at least. Anonymous attendee writes, what resources do you have from the Ottoman Empire? Okay, that's a great question. It's hard to answer in a short time. I would say most of the information that we have on individuals and families in the Ottoman Empire comes in the form of books. But within those books, again, you can find a lot of information about, people, whether they're prominent members of various Jewish communities of the Ottoman Empire, or some books contain like abstracts of sort of the usual types of genealogy resources we use, such as circumcision registers, some marriage registers, and other I would say also there are some places where you can see photos of tombstones from the old Jewish cemeteries in these communities. So it's not just sort of a broad overview of history of the Jewish communities in again all the places that made up the Ottoman Empire, but also down to details about your individual family members, potentially, I should say. I do recommend searching our catalog, search.cjh.org, for a specific town or city within the Ottoman Empire to help narrow things down. And I also want to mention, since I've done a lot of pitching for jewishgen.org, there's a great website called sephardicgen.com, which is similar to Jewish Gen, but of course Sephardi in its scope, and has all sorts of things, including databases that you can search by name, links to other valuable websites, bibliographies, and more. So I would check that out for those of you who have Sephardic ancestry. Let's see. I think that's the last question. So again, for all of you who did not receive a thorough answer tonight, you will still receive a response from one of us by email. If any of you have questions about anything I talked about tonight that you did not answer in time or did not post in time, you can also feel free to email us at gi@cjh.org. And for those of you who are not watching live, similarly, you can email us anytime. And thank you so much, Bridget. I really appreciate that. I hope you all have a good night, and I look forward to seeing you at a future Family History Today program. Bye. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, good night, everyone.